The auction house reeked of desperation and expensive perfume. Evangeline Thorne stood on the raised platform, her wrists bound in silk rope that felt obscene against her skin. Soft where it should have been coarse, decorative where it should have been functional. The rope was dyed crimson, blood red, she thought, and nearly laughed at the bitter irony. Around her, masked figures filled the underground chamber like beautiful predators circling prey. The masquerade ball above had been a ruse. She understood now. The true transaction happened here, in this vaulted stone room lit by 1,000 candles that cast dancing shadows across faces hidden behind gilded masks, shaped like ravens, wolves, and serpents. Her father had sold her to pay his gambling debts, not metaphorically, not in some genteel arrangement of marriage to an elderly lord. He had sold her body blood, and whatever remained of her foolish soul, to the highest bidder in an auction frequented by creatures who should not exist outside of Gothic novels and fever dreams. Lot 17, the auctioneer announced, his voice echoing off stone walls that had probably witnessed centuries of similar transactions. 22 years of age. Untouched. Blue blood through her mother's line. Ashford lineage, for those who recognize the vintage. Evangeline's cheeks burned. The thin white gown they'd dressed her in left nothing to imagination, its fabric so sheer she might as well have been naked. They'd unpinned her dark hair so it fell in waves past her shoulders, and someone had dusted her skin with powder that made her luminous under candlelight. She looked like a virgin sacrifice from a pre-Raphaelite painting. "We'll start the bidding at £5,000, the auctioneer continued. A paddle rose immediately. A woman in a fox mask, her smile predatory. 6,000, called another voice, male and guttural. The bids rose quickly. 7,008. 10. Evangeline watched the numbers climb with a strange detachment, as though this were happening to someone else. As though she weren't the commodity being appraised and purchased like a particularly fine bottle of wine. Her father stood in the shadows near the back, refusing to meet her eyes. Coward. He'd gambled away their estate, their reputation, everything, and when the debts came due and the collectors revealed themselves to be something other than human, he'd offered his daughter as payment rather than face whatever darkness he'd bargained with. 15,000. Someone bid. The room had gone quieter now. Evangeline could feel the attention of every masked figure fixed on her like cold fingers trailing across her skin. She lifted her chin, refusing to cower. If she was to be sold like livestock, she would at least maintain her dignity. £20,000. The new voice cut through the chamber like a blade through silk. Every head turned. He stood at the back of the room, half hidden in shadow despite the abundance of candlelight. Tall, impossibly tall, with a presence that seemed to draw all air from the vaulted space. His mask was simpler than the others, black and unadorned except for silver filigree that caught the light when he moved. Beneath it, she glimpsed a strong jaw and lips that looked carved from marble. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch, even from across the room, even shadowed by the mask. They gleamed like polished onyx reflecting candlelight. Ancient eyes. Eyes that had seen empires rise and fall, that held centuries of knowledge and hunger and something she couldn't name. The auctioneer's voice wavered. 20,000. Do I hear? 30,000. The stranger said, his accent refined and faintly archaic. British aristocracy from an era when such things still meant something. And I'll pay in gold, not promissory notes. A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Gold. Real gold. In an age where such currency was decorative at best. The woman in the fox mask hissed something under her breath and lowered her paddle. 35,000. Another voice tried weakly. The stranger didn't move, didn't speak. He simply looked at the would-be bidder, and whatever the man saw in that gaze made him stumble backward, paddle clattering to the stone floor. No one else bid. Sold. The auctioneer announced, relief evident in his voice. Lot 17 to Lord Cassius Ravenwood, for £30,000 in gold. Ravenwood. Even Evangeline, sheltered as she'd been, recognized that name. An old family, ancient really. Noble bloodline stretching back to before the Norman conquest. Reclusive. Powerful. There were rumors, of course. Whispered stories about the Ravenwood estate. About the family that never aged. About servants who disappeared and were never seen again. Gothic nonsense, she'd always thought. Now, watching him move through the crowd with the fluid grace of a predator, she wasn't certain. He climbed the steps to the platform, each footfall precise and measured. Up close, he was devastating, sharp cheekbones and a mouth that suggested both cruelty and unexpected gentleness. The mask shadowed his eyes but couldn't hide their intensity as they fixed on her face. "Your name," he said softly, his voice like smoke and honey. Evangeline Thorne. She was proud her voice didn't shake. And I suppose you're my new owner. Something flickered in those dark eyes. Amusement. Regret? Owner is such a crude word, he murmured, reaching up to remove his mask. The face revealed made her heart stutter. Impossibly beautiful, ageless, with skin like alabaster and features that belonged in a Renaissance painting. But it was the fangs she glimpsed when he spoke that confirmed what every instinct had been screaming. Vampire. I prefer, Lord Cassius Ravenwood said, his cold fingers tilting her chin upward with unexpected gentleness. The term protector. And I paid triple your asking price, Miss Thorne, because you're not merchandise to be bargained for. His thumb brushed her lower lip, sending ice and fire through her veins simultaneously. You're something far more dangerous, he whispered, leaning close enough that she could feel the absence of breath against her skin. You're my salvation. Or my damnation. I haven't yet decided which. Then he swept her into his arms and carried her from the auction house into the moonless night, leaving her father's protestations and the shocked murmurs of the crowd echoing behind them like ghosts. The carriage that awaited them was a relic from another century. Evangeline had expected something modern, a motor car, perhaps sleek and efficient like the vehicles that now crowded London's streets. Instead, Lord Ravenwood handed her into an enclosed coach of black, lacquered wood adorned with silver ravens, its interior upholstered in midnight velvet that swallowed what little moonlight dared penetrate the darkness. He settled across from her with that unnatural grace, removing his cloak to reveal formal evening, wear that looked authentically Victorian rather than costume. His eyes, no longer shadowed by the mask, fixed on her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. You're not afraid, he observed as the carriage lurched into motion. I'm terrified, Evangeline corrected, surprised by her own honesty. But I learned long ago that fear changes nothing. My father gambled away everything I loved. Being sold to a vampire is merely the final humiliation in a long series of them. Yet you maintain your composure admirably. Something like approval flickered across his perfect features. Most mortals would be weeping or attempting escape by now. Would escape be possible? She met his gaze directly, refusing to look away first, his lips curved into something too sharp to be called a smile. No, but I appreciate that you ask rather than simply hysteria or submission. They traveled in silence for a time, the carriage wheels clattering over cobblestones that gradually gave way to country roads. Evangeline watched the city lights fade behind them, replaced by darkness punctuated only by occasional moonlight breaking through clouds. Where are you taking me? She finally asked. Home. He said it with the weight of centuries. Ravenwood Manor. My family's estate for the past 600 years. 600 years. The number settled over her like a shroud. How old was he? What had he seen, witnessed, done in those endless decades? The auction, she said carefully. Those others, they were like you, vampires. His tone was almost amused. Some. Others were collectors of rare pleasures. Your father's debts were held by the Crimson Court, a coalition of my kind who trade in mortal commodities. Blood servants, usually, donors who willingly exchange their vitality for protection and wealth. But I wasn't willing. No. His expression darkened, which is why I intervened. The court's auctions typically deal in the desperate but consenting. Your father's attempt to sell you without your knowledge or agreement violated our oldest laws. Had I not purchased you, the court's justiciar would have executed him and claimed you anyway as blood price. Evangeline absorbed this. So you saved us both. I saved you, he corrected softly. Your father's fate is his own to navigate. I paid his debts to spare you the alternative, which would have been far less pleasant than my household, I assure you. The carriage turned onto a private road, trees forming a canopy overhead that blocked even the meager moonlight. Evangeline felt the temperature drop, the air growing thick with something she couldn't name. Magic, death, the weight of centuries. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why pay triple for a stranger? Why intervene at all? Lord Ravenwood was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a wariness that made him sound infinitely old. Your mother's bloodline. Ashford. He leaned forward slightly, candlelight from the carriage lamp casting shadows across his aristocratic features. Do you know anything of your maternal ancestry? Very little. My mother died when I was young. Father never spoke of her family. The Ashfords were an ancient house with connections to my kind, stretching back to the Plantagenet era. They served as mediators between vampire courts and mortal nobility, keepers of treaties, holders of blood oaths. His eyes seemed to glow faintly in the darkness, Their bloodline carries a unique property, a natural resistance to thrall, to compulsion, to the mental dominion most vampires can exert over mortals. Evangeline's breath caught. I can't be controlled. Precisely. Which makes you either completely useless or infinitely valuable, depending on one's perspective. He studied her as though she were a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. I've spent 3 centuries searching for someone of Ashford descent. The bloodline was thought extinct after the last known heir died in 1847. My grandmother. Evangeline whispered, memory stirring. She married beneath her station. The family disowned her, and kept her existence hidden from those who would have sought her out. Lord Ravenwood's expression turned grim. Your father either didn't know what he possessed or was too foolish to understand. By bringing you to that auction, he exposed you to every ancient creature who remembers the old alliances. You would have become a prize in political games that predate your nation's founding. The carriage emerged from the tree tunnel, and Evangeline's words died in her throat. Ravenwood Manor rose before them like something from a Gothic nightmare made beautiful. The main house sprawled across the hilltop, its dark stone walls punctuated by tall windows that reflected moonlight like dead eyes. Towers jutted toward the cloud-streaked sky, their spires sharp as fangs. Ivy covered portions of the facade, but rather than looking romantic, it seemed to choke the stone, pulling the building down into earth and shadow. The grounds around it were immaculate, manicured gardens visible even in darkness, a maze of hedges forming intricate patterns, and beyond that, what looked like a private cemetery, its monuments gleaming pale against the dark grass. Welcome, Lord Ravenwood said as the carriage rolled to a stop before the main entrance, to your sanctuary, or your prison. That remains to be seen. He exited first, then offered his hand to help her descend. His touch was cold as marble but surprisingly gentle. The manor's front doors opened without anyone visibly touching them. Beyond lay a grand entrance hall lit by hundreds of candles in silver sconces. The walls hung with portraits of stern-faced aristocrats whose eyes seemed to follow movement. A sweeping staircase curved upward into shadow. I have but one rule, Lord Ravenwood said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Never enter the east wing after midnight. What dwells there is not for mortal eyes, and I cannot guarantee your safety if you violate that boundary. Evangeline turned to face him, this impossibly beautiful creature who had purchased her freedom at the cost of her autonomy. And what of my blood? She asked quietly. When will you claim what you truly bought? His eyes darkened to pure black, and for the first time, she saw the monster beneath the aristocratic veneer. When you offer it willingly, he said, his voice dropping to something between promise and threat. Not a moment before. Evangeline's chamber was a study in calculated luxury and subtle imprisonment. The room occupied the southern tower, its tall windows offering views of the moonlit gardens and the cemetery beyond. The four-poster bed was draped in heavy velvet the color of arterial blood, its canopy embroidered with silver thread that formed patterns she couldn't quite decipher in the candlelight. A wardrobe of dark mahogany stood against one wall, already filled with gowns in jewel tones, sapphire, emerald, amethyst, all cut in styles that suggested the previous century rather than the current one. A lady's maid had appeared without introduction, a pale, silent woman named Helena who helped Evangeline out of the auction gown and into a nightdress of ivory silk. Helena's hands were cold, her movements efficient but oddly mechanical, and she never once met Evangeline's eyes. Is she like him? Evangeline had asked, testing the waters. Helena's lips had curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. I serve Lord Ravenwood faithfully. That is all you need to know. Then she departed, leaving Evangeline alone with her racing thoughts and the oppressive weight of the manor pressing down around her. Sleep should have been impossible. Yet exhaustion claimed her almost immediately. The dreams came with the weight of memory, not her own. She walked through Ravenwood Manor as it had been centuries ago. The halls lit by torches instead of candles, the stone walls newer and less weathered. Figures in medieval dress moved past her like ghosts, their conversations in languages she shouldn't understand but somehow did. French, Latin, something older still. Then she was in the portrait gallery, standing before a massive painting she hadn't seen during her brief glimpse of the entrance hall. The figure in the portrait was Lord Ravenwood, younger somehow, though his face held the same ageless beauty. He wore armor marked with a red cross, a crusader's regalia, his hand resting on the pommel of a sword. But his eyes in the painting were different. They held warmth, humanity, something approaching hope. Behind him in the painting, barely visible in the shadowed background, stood another figure. A woman in medieval dress, her face obscured but her hand reaching toward Ravenwood, as though in benediction or farewell. "Find me," a voice whispered through the dream. "Remember what was forgotten." Evangeline woke with a gasp, her heart hammering against her ribs. Dawn light filtered weakly through the heavy curtains. She rose from the bed, wrapping a silk robe around herself, and ventured from her chamber despite every instinct screaming to stay hidden and safe. The manor felt different in daylight, less overtly menacing but somehow more uncanny, as though the shadows themselves watched her movements with calculation. She passed no servants, heard no sounds of habitation beyond her own footfalls on ancient carpet runners. The portrait gallery wasn't difficult to find. It occupied the entire west wing of the manor's second floor, a long corridor lined with paintings stretching back through centuries of Ravenwood lineage. She walked past stern medieval lords, Renaissance nobles, Georgian aristocrats, all bearing variations of the same striking features, the same dark eyes, the same immortal beauty barely concealed beneath period dress. There, at the gallery's end, hung the portrait from her dream. Evangeline approached it slowly, her breath catching as details resolved in the morning light. Lord Ravenwood in Crusader armor, yes, but the painting was older than she'd realized. The technique suggested the 13th century, impossible as that seemed. The paint had cracked with age, yet the image remained vivid, almost unnaturally so. She leaned closer, studying the shadowed figure behind him. "She was my damnation." Lord Ravenwood's voice came from directly behind her, close enough that she felt the absence of breath against her neck. Evangeline spun, finding him mere inches away. In daylight or what weak sunlight penetrated the heavy drapes, he looked even more otherworldly. His skin held the pallor of death, beautiful and terrible simultaneously. He wore a simple black shirt and trousers, eschewing the formal wear from the previous night, but somehow the casual attire made him more dangerous rather than less. "You should be resting," he continued, though his tone held no reproach. "The transition to Ravenwood Manor can be disorienting. I dreamed of this painting," Evangeline said, refusing to back away despite her racing pulse. "I heard a voice telling me to remember." Something flickered in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "Your Ashford blood. It carries memory in ways mortal lineages don't. You're experiencing blood echoes, fragments of the past your ancestors witnessed." Who was she? Evangeline gestured to the obscured figure in the portrait. Lord Ravenwood was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the painting with an intensity that suggested pain barely leashed. Her name was Isolde, an Ashford daughter, 6 centuries ago. His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "I was human then, a crusader returning from the Holy Land, seeking redemption for sins committed in the name of God. The Ashfords offered sanctuary when plague ravaged the countryside. Isolde tended the sick without fear, without judgment." He reached out, his fingers hovering near the painted image but not quite touching. "She saved me when the fever came, nursed me through delirium that should have killed me, and when I recovered, I loved her with all the foolish passion of a mortal man who believes he has forever." His hand dropped to his side. "I had 3 months. That's all we had before he came." "Hey," Evangeline prompted softly. "The vampire who made me." Lord Ravenwood's voice turned bitter. "An ancient thing hunting Ashford bloodline, seeking to bind their power to his own purpose. He found me with Isolde in the garden one midnight. Gave me a choice, die and leave her to his mercy, or accept the dark gift and spend eternity protecting what I loved most. You chose immortality. I chose to save her life." He turned to face Evangeline fully, and she saw centuries of anguish in those dark eyes. "But the transformation took 3 days. 3 days of agony during which she never left my side, even as I screamed for death, even as my humanity burned away. When I finally rose from that darkness, the first thing I smelled was her blood." Evangeline's breath caught. "Did you kill her?" "No." His lips twisted. "Worse. I fled, abandoned her without explanation, terrified that my hunger would overcome the love that had sustained me. I disappeared into darkness, believing I was protecting her from the monster I'd become." "And?" Evangeline asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. Lord Ravenwood moved past her to stand before the portrait, his reflection conspicuously absent in the painting's protective glass. "She died 3 years later, still waiting for me to return. Still believing I'd loved her enough to stay." He spoke without emotion now, as though the words had been rehearsed over centuries of self-recrimination. "The Ashford line splintered after her death. Without her to maintain the blood bonds, the treaties fell apart, and my kind hunted her descendants for the power their blood represented." He turned to face Evangeline again, and she saw something dangerous ignite in his expression, not hunger, but something more complex. Obsession. Hope. Desperation. When I learned an Ashford daughter still lived, when I saw you on that auction platform. He moved closer, his cold hand rising to cup her cheek with unexpected tenderness. You have her eyes. The same defiance, the same impossible courage in the face of darkness. Evangeline's heart hammered, but she didn't pull away. I'm not her. No, he agreed softly. You're not. But perhaps you're my second chance to do what I should have done 6 centuries ago. Witches. His thumb brushed her lower lip, the gesture intimate and claiming. Protect what matters. At any cost. 3 days passed in Gothic monotony. Evangeline explored the manor with cautious curiosity, mapping its labyrinthine corridors and shadowed chambers like a prisoner learning the boundaries of her cage. The library became her sanctuary, a vast room of floor-to-ceiling shelves holding volumes in dozens of languages, some so ancient the leather bindings crumbled at her touch. She found treatises on alchemy beside Gothic novels, medical texts from the Renaissance beside illuminated manuscripts depicting creatures that should exist only in nightmares. Lord Ravenwood appeared at irregular intervals, always at dusk or later, never in daylight. He would find her reading or walking the gardens and engage her in conversation that felt like verbal fencing, each testing the other's boundaries, neither willing to yield first. He spoke of history as though he'd lived it, which of course he had. The fall of Constantinople, the Wars of the Roses, the French Revolution, all witnessed firsthand, all colored by centuries of perspective. Yet he never touched her again after that moment in the portrait gallery. Never fed in her presence. Never displayed the slightest hint of the predator lurking beneath his aristocratic veneer. It made her uneasy, this careful distance. As though he were waiting for something. The answer came on the 4th night, when Evangeline made her first mistake. She'd been exploring the East Wing, the forbidden territory, driven by the same reckless curiosity that had sustained her through her father's decline and her own subsequent sale. The grandfather clock in the entrance hall had chimed 11 times, and she'd reasoned that midnight was still an hour away. Surely that counted as safe. The East Wing was colder than the rest of the manor, the air thick with something that made her lungs work harder to draw breath. The corridor stretched into shadow despite the candles she carried, their flames guttering as though fighting an invisible wind. Doors lined the hallway, all closed, all somehow threatening in their anonymity. She chose one at random and pushed it open. The chamber beyond was a bedroom clearly unused for decades. Dust covered every surface like gray snow. The bed's canopy had rotted to tatters, and the mirror above the vanity had cracked in a spiderweb pattern that suggested violence rather than age. But it was the painting above the fireplace that stopped her breath. Isolde. It had to be her, though this portrait showed her face clearly unlike the shadowed figure in the Crusader painting. She was breathtaking, dark hair falling in waves past her shoulders, eyes the same blue as Evangeline's own, lips curved in a gentle smile that suggested secrets and sorrows equally balanced. She wore a medieval gown of deep crimson, and around her throat, a pendant in the shape of a raven with ruby eyes. Evangeline moved closer, transfixed. The resemblance was uncanny, almost disturbing in its precision. She could have been looking at her own reflection dressed in period costume. Behind her, something shifted in the shadows. She spun, candles held high, heart hammering. Hello. The darkness seemed to thicken, to coalesce. A figure emerged, not Lord Ravenwood, but something other. Male, beautiful in the way poisonous things often were, with platinum hair and eyes like chips of ice. He wore clothing from decades past, and when he smiled, his fangs gleamed in the candlelight. The new pet. He purred, his voice carrying an accent she couldn't place. How delicious. Cassius has been keeping you locked away like a treasure. I wondered when curiosity would override caution. Evangeline backed toward the door, her mind racing. Another vampire. An intruder, or something worse. The East Wing is forbidden, she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Lord Ravenwood. Eyes hunting in the woods, too far to hear you scream. The creature moved with liquid grace, circling her like a shark scenting blood. Did he tell you why this wing is forbidden? Did he explain what dwells here? You, she guessed. His laughter was silver bells and shattering glass. Among other things, I am Lucian, once companion to your precious Lord Ravenwood, now his eternal enemy. This was my chamber, before he banished me to the shadows between darkness and death. He lunged. Evangeline threw the candelabra at him and ran, her nightgown tangling around her legs as she fled into the corridor. Behind her, Lucian's laughter echoed, amused rather than angry. He was playing with her, she realized, letting her run because the chase entertained him. She rounded a corner and collided with solid, cold flesh. Lord Ravenwood caught her by the shoulders, his face transformed by fury into something monstrous. His eyes had gone completely black, fangs fully extended, the veneer of humanity stripped away to reveal the predator beneath. Lucian. He snarled, the word barely human. Cassius. The platinum-haired vampire appeared at the corridor's far end, unruffled and smiling. Your pet wandered where she shouldn't. I was merely introducing myself. You were feeding. Lord Ravenwood's grip on Evangeline tightened protectively. I can smell your hunger from here. Can you blame me? She carries Ashford blood. Do you know how long it's been since I tasted that particular vintage? Lucian's expression turned calculating. 6 centuries, I believe. The same night you chose damnation over her predecessor's bed. Lord Ravenwood moved with speed that defied physics, placing himself between Evangeline and Lucian, his body a wall of lethal intent. You violated the binding. The East Wing was your prison in exchange for your continued existence. By approaching her, you've broken our covenant. Then destroy me. Lucian spread his arms in invitation. If you can. But we both know you won't, brother. You need me alive to maintain the wards that keep the truly ancient things from breaking through. Kill me, and this manor becomes a feeding ground for horrors that make me look like a saint. The air crackled with power, 2 immortal wills clashing in the space between heartbeats. Then Lord Ravenwood turned to Evangeline, and what she saw in his face made her gasp. Not anger, not fear, but hunger so profound it bordered on agony. You're bleeding, he said hoarsely. She looked down. In her panic, she must have cut her hand on something. The door, the candelabra, she couldn't remember. Blood welled from a gash across her palm. Dark and fragrant in the candlelit corridor, Lord Ravenwood's entire body trembled with the effort of restraint. Go, he commanded, his voice barely controlled. Return to your chamber. Lock the door. Do not emerge until dawn. But, go. The word was almost a roar. Evangeline ran. Behind her she heard Lucian's laughter and Lord Ravenwood's answering snarl. Then sounds of violence that shook the manor's ancient foundations. She fled to her tower chamber and barricaded the door. Her bleeding hand pressed against her chest, as her heart threatened to hammer through her ribs. Only when the sounds of battle finally faded did she allow herself to breathe. She'd awakened something tonight. Not just Lucian's hunger, but Lord Ravenwood's carefully leashed control. And as she wrapped her injured hand in torn silk, she wondered which was more dangerous, the enemy who wanted to drain her dry, or the protector who was fighting not to do the same. Dawn came slowly to Ravenwood Manor, gray light filtering through heavy clouds that promised rain. Evangeline sat by her window, watching the storm gather over the cemetery, her bandaged hand throbbing in time with her pulse. She'd slept in fragments, haunted by the sound of violence echoing through the manor's stone corridors and the memory of Lord Ravenwood's face transformed by hunger. He'd wanted her blood, not out of malice or cruelty, but with the raw desperation of a starving man confronted with sustenance. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something more complex, a dangerous curiosity about what it would feel like to satisfy that ancient hunger, to become sustenance for a creature who'd walked the earth for 6 centuries. The thought disturbed her more than Lucian's threat had. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Helena entered without waiting for permission, carrying a breakfast tray and fresh bandages. The maid's expression was carefully neutral as she set the tray on the writing desk and approached with the medical supplies. Let me see, Helena said, her voice flat and professional. Evangeline extended her injured hand. Helena unwrapped the silk with efficient movements, examining the wound with the practiced eye of someone who'd tended many injuries. The cut was deeper than Evangeline had realized, the flesh around it inflamed and angry. It needs cleaning properly, Helena murmured, producing a bottle of clear liquid that smelled of herbs and something sharper. This will hurt. The liquid burned like fire when applied. Evangeline bit back a cry, tears springing to her eyes. You shouldn't have gone to the East Wing. Helena continued as she worked, her tone almost conversational. The master forbade it for your protection, not to be cruel. Who is Lucian? Evangeline asked through gritted teeth. Helena's hand stilled for just a moment. Someone Lord Ravenwood loved once. Before that love curdled into hatred. She resumed wrapping fresh bandages around Evangeline's palm. They were companions during the early centuries after the master's turning. Brothers in darkness, hunting together, sharing blood and immortality's burdens. Then Lucian discovered what the Ashford bloodline could offer, power beyond mere sustenance. He wanted to drain a soul dry, to consume her essence and claim her gifts for himself. And Lord Ravenwood stopped him. At great cost. Helena secured the bandage with practiced efficiency. The battle between them nearly destroyed this manor. In the end, the master bound Lucian to the East Wing using blood magic older than Christianity, a prison formed of sacrifice and eternal vigilance. Lucian remains trapped there, neither fully alive nor truly destroyed, sustained by the same wards that contain him. But he escaped last night. No. Helena's pale eyes met Evangeline's directly for the first time. You entered his domain. The wards prevent him from leaving the East Wing, but they cannot protect those foolish enough to wander in. Your fortunate Lord Ravenwood sensed the disturbance when he did. Evangeline absorbed this, a new question forming. You're not human, are you? Helena's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. I died of consumption in 1823. Lord Ravenwood found me in a workhouse, hours from death, and offered a choice. True death or service in exchange for immortality. I chose service. I've never regretted it. She collected the soiled bandages. He is kinder than most of our kind, Miss Thorne. Remember that when you judge him for his nature. After Helena departed, Evangeline forced herself to eat despite her churning stomach. The morning stretched endlessly, rain beginning to drum against the windows as the storm finally broke. She attempted to read but couldn't focus, her thoughts returning obsessively to the previous night. As afternoon shadows lengthened, she noticed something odd about her injured hand. The pain had faded almost completely, and when she unwrapped the bandage to check the wound, she found the edges had begun to close with unnatural speed. The inflammation was gone, the flesh knitting together as though days had passed rather than hours. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't normal healing. She rewrapped the bandage quickly and retreated to the library, seeking distraction in the ancient texts. One volume caught her attention, a leather-bound journal written in archaic English, its pages yellowed but still legible. The author's name on the first page made her breath catch, Isolde of House Ashford, in the year of our Lord 1247. Evangeline's hands trembled as she opened the journal properly and began to read. He came to us broken by war and fever. This crusader who'd seen horrors no mortal should witness. Father wanted to turn him away, fearing contagion, but I could not abandon one so clearly in death's embrace. I tended him through 9 nights of delirium, and when the fever finally broke, he looked at me as though I were salvation itself. The entries continued, chronicling a love story both tender and doomed. Isolde wrote of stolen moments in the garden, of conversations lasting until dawn, of a connection that transcended their different stations. Then came the darker entries. He watches us. The pale lord who haunts the shadows between dusk and midnight. I've seen him in dreams. Felt his hunger pressing against the ward's father maintains. He wants our blood, our gift, our lineage consumed and bound to his eternal will. Cassius knows nothing of this. How can I tell him the danger my very existence poses? The final entry was dated 3 days before Isolde's death, according to the portrait's inscription. The transformation is complete. Cassius rose tonight, beautiful and terrible, his humanity burned away by immortal fire. But the monster who made him has vanished, leaving only questions and this terrible new hunger in my beloved's eyes. He looked at me across the chamber, and I saw the battle raging within him, love warring with bloodlust, devotion fighting against the predator's instinct. He fled at dawn, believing he was protecting me. Fool, beloved fool. Does he not understand that I would have given my blood freely, bound myself to him through the old rituals, become his anchor in darkness? I will wait. However long it takes, I will wait for him to return. The journal ended there, the remaining pages blank. Evangeline closed the volume with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face for a woman dead 6 centuries. Isolde had been willing to give everything, her blood, her mortality, her very soul to save the man she loved, and Cassius had run, believing his absence was protection rather than abandonment. She died waiting for me. Evangeline spun to find Lord Ravenwood standing in the library's entrance, looking haggard in ways that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. He wore the same clothes from the previous night, now torn and stained with dark patches that might have been blood. His eyes were bloodshot, his expression raw with an emotion she was beginning to recognize: grief. Ancient, unhealed, and absolute. I read her journal. Evangeline said softly, I know. I can smell her essence on the pages when you touch them, blood memory released by Ashford contact. He moved into the room slowly, as though approaching something fragile. Your bloodline retains echoes of those who came before. It's why you dreamed of the portrait, why you're healing faster than any mortal should. He gestured to her bandaged hand. Your blood recognized mine when it touched your wound. Even now, it's repairing the damage using knowledge written into your very essence. 6 centuries of Ashford resilience distilled into your veins. Is that why you bought me? Evangeline asked. Because I remind you of her. No. Lord Ravenwood stopped a few feet away, maintaining careful distance. I bought you because you deserve better than being consumed by creatures who see you only as power to be claimed. But I won't lie, seeing you on that platform, seeing Isolde's courage and defiance reborn in another woman. His voice broke. It felt like providence or damnation. I still don't know which. Evangeline stood, closing the distance between them despite every logical instinct screaming caution. Show me. Show you what? What she offered you. Evangeline unwrapped her bandaged hand, revealing the healing wound, the blood bond she wanted to create. Show me why you ran. Lord Ravenwood stared at Evangeline's outstretched hand as though she'd offered him salvation and damnation wrapped in mortal flesh. You don't know what you're asking, he said, his voice hoarse with restraint. The blood bond isn't a simple exchange. It's a covenant that binds souls across lifetimes, that makes your heartbeat synchronize with mine. Your dreams merge with my darkness. Once formed, it cannot be undone. Then explain it to me, Evangeline insisted, refusing to lower her hand. If I'm to live in this manner, surrounded by creatures who want my blood, I deserve to understand what I possess. The muscle in his jaw tightened. For a long moment, she thought he might refuse, might simply leave her in ignorance as protection. Then he moved to the library's far wall and pulled aside a tapestry depicting medieval hunting scenes, revealing a hidden door carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Come, he said. If you truly want understanding, I'll show you what 6 centuries of guilt has taught me. The passage beyond descended into darkness that even her candle could barely penetrate. Lord Ravenwood moved ahead with the confidence of someone who could see perfectly in absolute blackness, occasionally glancing back to ensure she followed. The air grew colder with each step, carrying a scent like turned earth and old stone. They emerged into a chamber that stole Evangeline's breath. The room was circular, its walls covered in frescoes depicting the history of vampire and Ashford alliance. She saw medieval ceremonies where mortals offered their wrists to elegant creatures of darkness, Renaissance scenes of blood oaths sworn by candlelight, Georgian-era portraits of partnerships that blurred the line between predator and prey into something more complex, devotion, perhaps, or symbiosis. In the chamber's center stood a stone altar, its surface inscribed with Latin phrases and symbols that seemed to writhe in the candlelight. This is where the old covenants were formed, Lord Ravenwood explained, his voice echoing off ancient stone. When vampire and Ashford bloodline joined willingly, creating bonds that benefited both. We gained sustenance without death, without the madness that comes from feeding on unwilling victims. They gained protection, extended life, and access to our knowledge and power. He moved to the altar, his fingers tracing the carved symbols with something approaching reverence. The blood bond is more than feeding. When freely given by Ashford blood, it creates a connection that amplifies both parties. The vampire gains clarity of thought, resistance to bloodlust's madness, and an anchor to humanity they've lost. The mortal gains healing abilities, extended lifespan, and protection from other supernatural threats. His dark eyes met hers. But it requires absolute trust. The moment of exchange creates vulnerability neither party can defend against. That's why you fled from Isolde, Evangeline said softly, understanding dawning. You didn't trust yourself not to drain her completely. I was 3 days old as a vampire. The hunger was... He stopped, his expression twisting with remembered anguish. Monstrous. All-consuming. I could think of nothing but the blood singing in her veins, calling to the predator I'd become. I loved her more than my own soul, and I knew with absolute certainty that if I touched her, I would kill her. But the bond would have prevented that. How could I know? Lord Ravenwood's voice rose with centuries of self-recrimination. My maker abandoned me without instruction, without guidance. I had no knowledge of what I'd become or how to control it. All I knew was hunger and horror at what I'd been transformed into. He turned away, shoulders rigid. So I ran, and she died believing I'd abandoned her out of disgust rather than devotion. Evangeline set down her candle and approached the altar, studying the inscriptions more closely. Latin phrases about covenant and communion, about blood given freely becoming bond eternal. One symbol in particular drew her attention, a raven and a rose intertwined, the thorns drawing blood that the raven drank, the Ravenwood and Ashford sigil. Lord Ravenwood said, noticing her focus. created in 1134 when the first formal alliance was sworn. For over a century, our families were joined through blood covenant. Then I destroyed it all through cowardice, not cowardice. Evangeline corrected quietly. Fear. There's a difference. She turned to face him fully, her injured hand throbbing as though her blood itself responded to this place, to the history soaked into these stones. Last night, when you saw my wound, when you smelled my blood, she took a steadying breath. What did you feel? His eyes darkened to pure black. Hunger. Need so profound it bordered on agony. The scent of Ashford blood after 6 centuries of searching, of starving for what could restore what I'd lost. His hands clenched into fists. And terror that I would repeat my greatest failure, that I would take too much and watch you die as Isolde died, waiting for me to be stronger than my nature. But you didn't take anything. Evangeline moved closer, closing the distance between them in the candlelit chamber. You sent me away and fought Lucian instead. You chose restraint, barely. The word was torn from him. I wanted to follow you. Every instinct screamed to hunt you down, to corner you in your chamber, and he stopped, jaw clenched tight. And what? Evangeline pressed. Feed until I died. Or finally accept what your nature is and trust yourself enough to stop. I don't know. The admission seemed to cost him everything. That's the horror of it. 600 years of existence, and I still don't trust myself with what matters most. Evangeline reached out, her bandaged hand finding his cold cheek with surprising steadiness. He flinched at the contact but didn't pull away, his eyes closing as though the simple touch caused pain. Isolde wrote that she would have given her blood freely. Evangeline said softly, that she wanted to become your anchor. You denied her that choice out of fear. Are you going to make the same mistake twice? His eyes opened, fixed on her face with an intensity that should have been frightening. What are you saying? I'm saying that I'm tired of being a commodity others fight over. I'm tired of being protected from choices that are mine to make. Her thumb brushed his jaw, feeling the unnatural coldness of his skin. You bought me to save me from worse fates. You've offered sanctuary without demanding payment. You've shown more honor than any mortal man in my life. Evangeline, her name was a warning and a plea. Teach me the covenant, she said firmly. Not tonight, not in hunger or desperation. But show me what the bond requires, what it offers, so I can decide for myself whether to offer what Isolde never had the chance to give. Lord Ravenwood caught her wrist gently, his thumb finding her racing pulse. If we form this bond, you will be forever changed. Your life will extend beyond normal mortal span. You'll share my darkness, feel my hunger, know the weight of centuries pressing down through our connection. Other vampires will sense our bond and either fear or covet you accordingly. And you? Evangeline asked. What will you gain? His expression softened into something approaching hope, fragile and terrifying in its vulnerability. Perhaps, he whispered, a reason to stop running from what I am. Thunder rolled across the manor above them, rain beginning to fall in earnest. Then teach me, Evangeline repeated. And when the time comes, if I choose to offer this freely, you'll accept without running, without fear, without repeating history's cruelest mistakes. Lord Ravenwood pulled her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her bandaged palm that felt like a vow. I'll teach you everything, he promised against her skin. And may God forgive me for wanting you to choose this, to choose me. Despite every reason you shouldn't, the lessons began the following evening. After Lord Ravenwood had spent the daylight hours in whatever hidden sanctuary protected him from the sun's lethal touch, Evangeline found him in the conservatory, a glass-enclosed garden where night, blooming flowers filled the air with heavy perfume. Moonlight streamed through the crystalline ceiling, casting silver patterns across marble floors and the dark foliage of plants that thrived in perpetual twilight. He stood among blood, red roses, their thorns gleaming like small fangs in the lunar glow. When he turned at her approach, she saw he'd fed recently, his skin held more color, his movements less rigid with restraint. The knowledge should have disturbed her. Instead, she felt oddly relieved that he'd taken sustenance elsewhere, that whatever hunger burned in him had been temporarily sated. You fed, she said without preamble. Helena offered. His tone was carefully neutral. She provides when the hunger becomes problematic. It's an arrangement we've maintained for decades. Jealousy flared unexpectedly, hot and irrational. Evangeline crushed it down, recognizing the emotion as absurd. Helena was his servant, his creation. Whatever exchange occurred between them was transactional, not intimate. Yet the thought of his fangs at another's throat sent something possessive coiling through her chest. You're angry, Lord Ravenwood observed, a hint of amusement touching his lips. I'm not. Evangeline lied. You are. He moved closer, circling her with predatory grace. Your pulse just accelerated. Your pupils dilated. You're experiencing jealousy, that delightfully human emotion that transforms rational thought into territorial instinct. That's absurd, she protested, even as heat flooded her cheeks. Is it? He stopped directly behind her, his voice a whisper against her ear. You asked me to teach you about the covenant. The first lesson is this: blood bonds create possessiveness in both parties. The vampire becomes protective, territorial about their chosen donor, and the mortal, his cold breath ghosted across her neck, becomes equally possessive about who else the vampire feeds from. Evangeline's heart hammered. That's not. Don't lie to yourself. His hand settled on her shoulders, gentle but firm. The covenant isn't merely practical exchange. It's intimate in ways that transcend physical touch. When you offer blood freely, when I accept with reverence rather than hunger, we become bound at a level that makes marriage seem superficial by comparison. He guided her to face him, his dark eyes holding hers with uncomfortable intensity. This is why I need you to understand fully before choosing. The bond will make you want to be my only source of sustenance. It will make you crave my bite with an intensity that borders on addiction. And it will make me, his jaw clenched, dangerously obsessed with your safety, your happiness, your very existence. You say that as though it's a warning? Evangeline said softly. But it sounds remarkably like devotion. Devotion can become imprisonment. Lord Ravenwood's expression darkened. I've seen it happen. Vampires who bind mortals not out of love but possession, keeping them locked away like treasures, feeding until their donors become hollow shells, sustained by nothing but the euphoria of the bite. Is that what you fear? That you'll become that kind of monster? I fear, he said with brutal honesty, that I already am, and you simply haven't realized it yet. He released her and moved to the conservatory's center, where moonlight pooled brightest. When he turned back to face her, his expression had shifted into something clinical, distant. A teacher rather than a conflicted immortal struggling with desire. The covenant requires 3 exchanges over 3 nights. He began, his voice taking on a lecturing tone. The first exchange creates initial connection. Donor and vampire taste each other's essence, establishing compatibility. Many vampires and mortals are incompatible, and their blood rejects each other, causing illness or madness. But Ashford blood is always compatible. With most vampires, yes. Your lineage was bred specifically for this purpose centuries ago, through carefully arranged marriages and bloodline cultivation. It's why you're so valuable, so coveted. His eyes gleamed in the darkness. The second exchange deepens the bond. The vampire's venom enters the donor's bloodstream more fully, beginning the transformation that extends life and grants enhanced healing. The donor begins to sense the vampire's emotions, to share fragments of their thoughts. And the third exchange, Lord Ravenwood's expression grew solemn. Completion. The bond becomes permanent, unbreakable except by true death. The vampire can find their donor anywhere in the world, sense their distress, even share their pain. And the donor becomes marked. Other vampires can smell the bond on them, know they're claimed and protected. He moved closer again, each step deliberate. But there's another aspect the old texts rarely mention. The physical act of feeding, when done within a covenant bond, becomes. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Intensely pleasurable for both parties. The venom carries euphoric properties that humans describe as transcendent addictive. Some donors become so dependent on the sensation they forget to live beyond the bite. You're trying to frighten me, Evangeline accused. I'm trying to ensure informed consent. He stopped mere inches away, close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes that suggested he'd been perhaps 30 when transformed. Because once we begin, once I taste your blood and you feel my fangs pierce your skin, you may want things you can't articulate. And I? His voice dropped to something raw. I may take more than I should simply because you taste like redemption and I've been damned for 6 centuries. Evangeline reached up, her fingers finding his jaw again, feeling the tension coiled in his immortal flesh. Then we establish boundaries. Rules, you take only what I freely offer, nothing more. And I promise not to offer more than you should take. You're impossibly naive, he murmured, but his eyes held something like wonder. I'm pragmatic, she corrected. You need what I can provide. I need the protection and knowledge you offer. This can be a partnership based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. Partnership, he repeated, as though testing the word. Isolde used that same term. She said we could be partners in darkness rather than predator and prey. She was wise. She was in love. Lord Ravenwood's hand rose to cover Evangeline's where it rested against his face. And love makes fools of us all, mortal or immortal. Before Evangeline could respond, glass shattered. They both spun as a figure crashed through the conservatory ceiling in a shower of crystal shards and moonlight. The vampire landed in a crouch among the roses, platinum hair gleaming ice, blue eyes fixed on them with predatory calculation. Lucien, how touching, he purred, rising to his full height with inhuman grace. Blood trickled from cuts across his pale skin where glass had sliced him, already healing before their eyes. A lesson in blood bonds. How very educational. But you forgot to mention one crucial detail, brother dear. Lord Ravenwood moved with blinding speed, positioning himself between Evangeline and the intruder. You broke the binding. That's a death sentence, Lucien. The binding weakens when Ashford blood spills within these walls. Lucien's smile was all fangs and malice. Her little adventure in the East Wing. That delicious wound that perfumed the entire manor, it created cracks in your precious wards. Cracks I've spent 3 nights widening. Wards! Lord Ravenwood's shout echoed through the conservatory, but Lucien was already moving, faster than Evangeline's eyes could track. He appeared at her side, one cold hand clamping around her throat, the other seizing her bandaged hand with crushing force. The detail he forgot to mention. Lucien whispered against her ear, his fangs grazing her neck, so that once an Ashford offers blood to one vampire, every other vampire in proximity becomes ravenous with jealousy. We can smell the intention on you, little morsel. You've already decided to bond with Cassius, which means, he bit down, pain exploded through Evangeline's shoulder, white-hot and paralyzing. But beneath the pain came something else, a sickening euphoria that made her knees buckle, a pleasure so intense it bordered on violation. She felt Lucien drinking deeply, felt her blood flowing into him, felt his venom spreading through her veins like liquid ice. Lord Ravenwood's roar shook the conservatory's remaining glass. He tore Lucien away from Evangeline with such violence that the platinum-haired vampire went flying across the garden, crashing through rose bushes and marble statuary. Evangeline collapsed, her vision swimming. Through the haze, she saw Lord Ravenwood transform fully, his fangs extending to impossible length, his eyes becoming bottomless voids, his aristocratic features warping into something ancient and monstrous. You dared, he snarled, his voice no longer human. You dared touch what's mine. The battle that erupted was too fast for mortal eyes to follow. 2 immortal creatures locked in combat that shattered marble and tore through exotic plants like they were paper. Blood splattered across moonlit glass, black in the silver light. Evangeline's shoulder throbbed with fire and ice simultaneously. She pressed her hand against the wound, feeling the puncture marks where Lucien's fangs had penetrated. His venom was spreading, making her thoughts fuzzy, her body hypersensitive to every sensation, and beneath it all, she felt something new. A faint awareness of Lord Ravenwood's fury, his terror for her safety, his absolute determination to destroy the threat. The bond had begun. Not through willing exchange, but through violation and violence. And as consciousness started to fade, Evangeline's last coherent thought was that Lucien had just forced the very connection Lord Ravenwood had been so careful to approach with consent and caution. Evangeline woke to agony and ecstasy warring in her veins. She lay in her tower chamber, moonlight streaming through windows she didn't remember opening. Her shoulder burned where Lucien had bitten her, the wound throbbing with each heartbeat. But beneath the pain ran currents of sensation that made her gasp. Heightened awareness of every texture against her skin, every scent in the air, every sound echoing through the manor's ancient halls. And something else. A presence in the back of her mind, dark and furious and utterly foreign. Lord Ravenwood, she could feel him somewhere in the manor, his emotions bleeding through whatever connection Lucien's violation had initiated. Rage like volcanic fire, guilt sharp as broken glass. And beneath it all, a hunger so profound it made her own pulse quicken in response. You're awake. Helena sat in the corner shadows, her pale face expressionless. She rose and approached the bed, carrying a tray with water and something that smelled medicinal. How long? Evangeline's voice came out hoarse. 6 hours since Lord Ravenwood carried you from the conservatory. He's been. Helena paused, choosing words carefully. Dealing with Lucien. The screams that suddenly echoed from somewhere deep below confirmed exactly how that dealing was progressing. Evangeline flinched, the sound carrying not just through her ears, but through that new awareness, letting her feel Lord Ravenwood's savage satisfaction with each cry Lucien made. Drink this. Helena commanded, offering a cup of dark liquid. It will help counteract the venom. Lucian's bite was forced, not consented. The bond he tried to create is incomplete and poisonous. Evangeline drank, nearly gagging on the bitter taste. He wanted to steal the covenant for himself. Yes, by biting you first, he hoped to corrupt your Ashford blood, making you unsuitable for proper bonding with Lord Ravenwood while gaining some fraction of your bloodline's power for himself. Helena set the empty cup aside. It was foolish. Lord Ravenwood will make him suffer for centuries before granting the mercy of true death. Another scream echoed, and Evangeline felt Lord Ravenwood's dark pleasure at the sound. The sensation disturbed her, not because she pitied Lucian, but because some part of her shared that vindictive satisfaction. She wanted Lucian punished for the violation, wanted him to hurt as she'd hurt. The partial bond? Evangeline said, fighting to focus through the haze of sensation. What does it mean? Helena's expression grew grave. You can feel him now, yes. Lord Ravenwood's emotions, his presence. That connection flows both ways. He's feeling your pain, your fear, your every sensation amplified through Ashford blood. It's driving him to madness. She gestured to the window. Look, Evangeline rose unsteadily and moved to the glass. Below, in the moonlit courtyard, she saw the destruction wrought by immortal rage. Statuary lay in rubble. Garden walls had been torn apart, and in the center of the devastation, a cage of silver chains held what remained of Lucian, broken, bleeding, but still alive through some perverse vampiric resilience. Lord Ravenwood stood before the cage, his back to the manor, his entire body rigid with barely leashed violence. He hasn't fed since carrying you here, Helena continued. The partial bond makes him vulnerable to bloodlust in ways he hasn't experienced in centuries. He can smell your blood through the connection, feel your heartbeat as though it's his own. The hunger is. She stopped overwhelming. Then he needs to feed. He refuses. Says he won't risk losing control near you, not with the bond incomplete and his restraint already compromised. Helena moved to stand beside Evangeline at the window. But he's weakening. The battle with Lucian took enormous energy, and the emotional strain of the bond is consuming what reserves remain. As if sensing her gaze, Lord Ravenwood turned. Even at this distance, Evangeline saw the change in him. Eyes pure black, fangs visible even with his mouth closed, his aristocratic features sharpened into something predatory. He stared up at her window with an intensity that made her breath catch. Through the bond, she felt his warring impulses. The desperate need to come to her, to ensure she lived and healed. The terror that if he did, he'd lose himself to the hunger singing through both their veins. The guilt that his failure to properly ward against Lucian had resulted in her violation. I'm sorry. The thought wasn't hers, but his, carried across the incomplete bond like a whisper in her mind. Evangeline pressed her hand against the cold glass. Come to me. His entire body tensed. Through the bond, she felt his refusal forming, all the reasons he needed to stay away crystallizing into adamant denial. Please, she sent again. Don't make Isolde's mistake in reverse. Don't run because you're afraid of what you might do. Lord Ravenwood's resistance wavered. She felt the exact moment it crumbled, replaced by desperate hunger and equally desperate devotion. He moved. One moment he stood in the courtyard. The next he was simply there in her chamber, having traversed the distance too quickly for mortal perception. He stopped just inside the door, hands clenched into fists, every muscle trembling with restraint. You shouldn't have called me, he said, his voice scraped raw. I'm barely civilized right now. The bond is making me. He stopped, jaw clenched so tight she heard teeth grinding. I can smell your blood. Feel your pulse. It's taking everything I have not to finish what Lucian started. Evangeline moved away from the window, approaching him despite Helena's sharp intake of breath, to complete the bond properly, with consent instead of violation. Evangeline. Her name was a warning and a prayer. She reached him, close enough now to see the fine tremors running through his immortal frame. The way his eyes tracked the movement of her throat with predatory focus. His fangs were fully extended, sharp and gleaming in the moonlight. Lucian poisoned the bond, she said softly. Helena explained. The connection is incomplete and corrupted because it was forced. Less. The word came through clenched teeth. Then fix it. Evangeline tilted her head, exposing the unmarred side of her neck. Take what he stole and make it ours instead. Complete the first exchange properly, with my willing consent. Lord Ravenwood's control shattered visibly. You don't understand what you're offering. The hunger is, I've never felt anything like this. The bond amplifies everything. If I bite you now, I might not be able to stop. Yes, you will. Evangeline's hand found his chest, feeling the absence of heartbeat beneath her palm. Because I'm Ashford blood, and our covenant is meant to anchor you, not destroy you. Because you've spent 6 centuries proving you're stronger than your nature. And because... She stopped, the truth catching in her throat. Because... He prompted hoarsely. Because I trust you, she finished quietly. Even knowing what you are, what you hunger for, what you're capable of, I trust you not to become the monster you fear. Something in his expression broke. Centuries of self-loathing cracking beneath the weight of her simple faith. His cold hand rose to cup her face with devastating gentleness. If I do this, he whispered, there's no going back. The first exchange will bind us together. You'll be mine and I'll be yours, for however long your extended life lasts. I know. You'll feel every dark impulse, every moment of hunger, every century of accumulated guilt and sorrow I carry. I know. And you'll still offer this freely. Evangeline smiled, the expression feeling strange on her face after everything that had happened. I've been sold, bartered, and had my blood stolen by force. For once in my life, I want to choose my own fate. And I choose this. I choose you. Lord Ravenwood's resistance finally, completely shattered. He pulled her close with careful reverence. One hand cradling her head while the other supported her back. His lips brushed her unmarred shoulder first, a kiss so gentle it made her shiver. Then his mouth traveled upward, along her neck, finding the spot where her pulse beat strongest. Forgive me. He whispered against her skin. Then his fangs pierced through. The pain was sharp and immediate, but it lasted only seconds before his venom flooded the wound. The sensation that followed defied description, pleasure so intense it bordered on transcendent. Warmth spreading through her veins like liquid sunlight, and beneath it all, the sense of connection snapping into place with the certainty of destiny. She felt him drinking, felt her blood flowing into him, felt his centuries of starvation finally finding sustenance. But more than that, she felt his soul, ancient and weary and achingly lonely, reaching for hers across the bond forming between them. Through the connection his thoughts merged with hers. Forgive me. Thank you, mine. Precious. Never let go. Worth waiting 6 centuries. My salvation, my damnation, my everything. Evangeline's hands tangled in his hair, holding him close rather than pushing away. The euphoria built like a symphony reaching crescendo, each pull of his mouth sending pleasure cascading through her body, until she couldn't tell where she ended and he began. Then, with effort that she felt echo through the bond, Lord Ravenwood pulled back. His lips were stained with her blood, his eyes slowly clearing from pure black to their normal dark brown. He held her carefully as her knees buckled, supporting her weight with immortal strength. The first exchange, he murmured, pressing his forehead against hers, completed with consent and devotion. 2 more to go, Evangeline managed, her voice dreamy with lingering euphoria. 2 more, he agreed softly. But not tonight. Tonight you rest. Heal. Let the bond settle. He carried her to the bed, laying her down with a gentleness that contradicted his predatory nature. As darkness pulled at her consciousness, she felt his presence in her mind, protective, possessive, and finally, blessedly at peace. Evangeline woke to the sensation of being watched by 100 eyes. The bond with Lord Ravenwood hummed in the back of her consciousness, steady and reassuring. Through it, she felt his presence somewhere below, calm but alert, like a predator waiting for inevitable danger. The first exchange had left her changed in subtle ways she was only beginning to understand. Colors seemed sharper, sounds clearer, and her healing shoulder no longer throbbed with pain, but merely tingled with the memory of fangs. She rose from bed to find a gown laid out. Deep burgundy velvet with silver embroidery forming raven patterns along the bodice and sleeves. The style was modern enough yet carried hints of Victorian elegance, formal attire for something important. Helena appeared as if summoned by thought alone. They've arrived, the maid said without preamble. The Crimson Court. Lord Ravenwood expected them, though not this quickly. Evangeline's pulse quickened. Because of Lucian. Because of you. Helena began helping her dress with practiced efficiency. Word spreads quickly among our kind. An Ashford daughter lives, bonded to Lord Ravenwood through the first exchange. Every ancient vampire within 500 miles will want to either claim that bond for themselves or destroy it to prevent his power from growing. The gown fit perfectly, as though made specifically for her measurements. Helena fastened a collar of silver around Evangeline's throat, decorative but also marking her as claimed, protected by covenant law. The court arrives under truce banner. Helena continued, working on Evangeline's hair. They cannot harm you directly without violating ancient protocols, but they can challenge Lord Ravenwood's claim, demand proof of consent. even attempt to purchase you from him. I'm not property to be sold again," Evangeline said sharply. Helena's lips curved slightly. "Which is precisely what you'll need to convince them of. The court still operates under medieval thinking. To them, mortals are commodities, even Ashford blood. You must prove yourself their equal, not their inferior." When Helena finally stepped back, Evangeline barely recognized her own reflection. She looked like something from a Gothic portrait, pale and beautiful in the burgundy gown, dark hair swept up to expose the silver collar and the still, healing bite mark on her shoulder. The mark of Lord Ravenwood's claim, visible proof of the covenant begun. "Are you ready?" Lord Ravenwood's thought whispered across the bond. "As I'll ever be," she sent back. "Remember, show no fear. They can smell it and they'll exploit any weakness." Helena guided her through the manor's corridors to the grand ballroom, a space Evangeline hadn't yet explored. The chamber was massive, its ceiling vaulted and painted with celestial scenes now shadowed by night. Chandeliers holding 1,000 candles illuminated the space, their light reflecting off mirrors that lined the walls in ornate frames. Vampires filled the room. Evangeline's steps faltered as she took in the gathered assembly. Dozens of them, perhaps more, all breathtakingly beautiful and utterly inhuman. They wore attire spanning centuries, medieval robes beside Regency coats beside modern evening wear, creating a temporal collision that made the scene feel dreamlike. Their eyes tracked her entrance with predatory focus, and she felt the weight of their collective hunger pressing against her like a physical force. Lord Ravenwood stood at the room's center, positioned before an elevated dais where 3 figures sat enthroned like chairs. He dressed formally in black tailcoat and silver waistcoat, his dark hair pulled back to reveal the sharp planes of his face. When his eyes found hers across the crowded room, she felt his relief and anxiety pulse through the bond. "Stay close to me," he sent. "Let me handle the politics." Evangeline crossed the ballroom with her head high, refusing to show the fear making her heart race. The assembled vampires parted for her passage, some with expressions of curiosity, others with naked hunger barely leashed. She felt Lord Ravenwood's protective fury spike through the bond, each time one of them looked at her too intently. She reached his side, and his hand found hers immediately, cold fingers interlacing with hers in a gesture both possessive and reassuring. "The Crimson Court recognizes Miss Evangeline Thorne," announced one of the 3 figures on the dais. The speaker was female, ancient beyond measure, with skin like polished ebony and eyes that glowed faint red. She wore robes that suggested North African origin, their fabric shimmering with threads that might have been gold or captured starlight. Last known daughter of House Ashford, bearer of the blood covenant gift, Lady Amara. Lord Ravenwood acknowledged with a slight bow. "I thank the court for honoring ancient protocols by arriving under truce." "We come not just to honor protocol," said the second figure, a vampire with Asian features and robes suggesting Tang Dynasty China. His voice carried the weight of millennia. "We come to investigate claims that you, Lord Ravenwood, have violated covenant law by binding an Ashford through coercion rather than consent." Evangeline's breath caught. Someone had accused Lord Ravenwood of forcing the bond. "Lord Shen speaks truth," added the third figure, a pale vampire whose accent placed him somewhere in Eastern Europe. Lucian of the Silver House made formal complaint before his incapacitation. "He claims you purchased Miss Thorne at auction like common chattel, imprisoned her in your estate, and initiated blood bond against her will." Through the bond, Evangeline felt Lord Ravenwood's cold fury, but his expression remained perfectly composed. "Lucian lies to conceal his own crimes. He violated the binding I placed upon him, attacked Miss Thorne without consent, and attempted to corrupt her Ashford blood for his own gain. Lucian cannot testify to his version of events," Lady Amara observed dryly, "as you've ensured he's currently regenerating from dismemberment in your dungeon." "Convenient. He attacked what was mine under covenant law. The punishment was justified. Was it yours?" Lord Shen leaned forward, his ancient eyes fixing on Evangeline with uncomfortable intensity. "Or did you simply claim it was to justify your actions?" Evangeline felt dozens of vampire gazes shift to her waiting. This was the moment Helena had warned about. Prove herself equal, or be dismissed as mere property in a dispute between her betters. She stepped forward, releasing Lord Ravenwood's hand despite his instinctive tightening grip. "I speak for myself," she said clearly, her voice carrying through the vast chamber. "I am no one's possession to be claimed or disputed." Murmurs rippled through the assembled vampires. Lady Amara's lips curved into something that might have been approval. Bold words from a mortal. The Eastern European vampire said, But words are wind. What proof do you offer of willing participation in this bond? I offer my voice, my agency, and my truth. Evangeline met his gaze directly, refusing to look away first. Lord Ravenwood purchased me at auction, yes, but not to own me. He intervened to prevent my sale to vampires who would have drained me for power without consent or care. He offered sanctuary without demanding payment. He taught me about the covenant so I could make informed choice. She touched the bite mark on her shoulder, feeling it tingle beneath her fingers. When Lucian violated me, forcing his fangs into unwilling flesh, Lord Ravenwood gave me something Lucian never would have, the choice to complete the bond properly or refuse it entirely. I chose, freely, with full knowledge of what it meant. Pretty speech, Lord Shen observed. But Ashford blood makes mortals susceptible to vampire influence. How do we know Lord Ravenwood hasn't simply thralled you into believing you chose freely? Because Ashford blood is resistant to thrall. Evangeline countered, drawing on the knowledge Lord Ravenwood had shared. That's the entire purpose of our bloodline. To serve as willing partners rather than mindless servants. You cannot compel what you cannot control. Lady Amara rose from her throne, descending the dais with fluid grace. She approached Evangeline, circling her like a predator assessing prey. Up close, the ancient vampire radiated power that made Evangeline's instincts scream to run. Show me the bond, Lady Amara commanded. I don't, Evangeline started. Think of him. Focus on the connection. Evangeline closed her eyes, reaching for the awareness of Lord Ravenwood humming in her consciousness. She felt him immediately, his protective fury, his fear for her safety, his desperate hope that the court would accept their bond as legitimate. The emotions were vivid, undeniable, flowing between them like a river of shared sensation. I see it, Lady Amara murmured, incomplete but genuine. First exchange completed with clear consent from both parties. She returned to the dais, studying Lord Ravenwood with calculating eyes. The bond bears none of the corruption that forced thrall creates. Miss Thorne's will remains her own. Relief flooded through Evangeline, echoed by Lord Ravenwood's matching emotion across the bond, but Lord Shen wasn't finished. The first exchange may have been consensual. That doesn't address the larger question. Should Lord Ravenwood be permitted to complete the covenant at all? The last time vampire and Ashford blood joined fully, the resulting power nearly upset the balance among our courts. Some argue allowing another such bond creates dangerous precedent. Some argue, said a new voice from the ballroom's entrance, that those who fear the covenant's power reveal their own weakness. Every vampire in the room turned. A figure stood in the doorway, tall and commanding, wrapped in shadows that seemed to cling to him like living things. When he stepped into candlelight, Evangeline's breath stopped. He was beautiful in the way natural disasters were beautiful, terrible and awesome and utterly mesmerizing. Silver, white hair fell past his shoulders, contrasting with skin that held an amber glow suggesting sunlight captured in flesh. His eyes were molten gold, and power radiated from him in waves that made every other vampire in the room seem diminished by comparison. Through the bond, she felt Lord Ravenwood's shock and something approaching dread. Who is that? She sent. My maker, Lord Ravenwood answered, his mental voice hollow with ancient fear. The one who abandoned me 6 centuries ago. The one who created this curse in the first place. The ancient vampire smiled, revealing fangs that gleamed like polished ivory. Hello, Cassius, he said with terrible fondness. It's been far too long since we've spoken, and you've been keeping such interesting company. His golden eyes fixed on Evangeline with hunger that made Lucian's assault seem gentle by comparison. I believe, the ancient vampire continued, we need to discuss the terms of your little covenant. Because the Ashford girl belongs to me by right of creation. Everything you are, everything you possess, it all flows from what I gave you that night 6 centuries ago. Including, he finished softly, your bonded mate. The ballroom fell into silence so absolute that Evangeline could hear the candle flames flickering in their chandeliers. Lord Ravenwood's hand found hers again, his grip tight enough to be painful if he'd been mortal. Through the bond, she felt his emotions in chaotic cascade, terror, fury, and beneath it all, a deep, abiding shame that made her heart ache for him. Alaric. Lord Ravenwood's voice was carefully controlled, but Evangeline heard the tremor beneath. You have no claim here. You abandoned your rights to my existence when you left me to burn through transformation alone. The ancient vampire, Alaric, moved into the room with the lazy confidence of something that had never known defeat. The assembled court vampires shifted away from his path, their own considerable power rendered insignificant by his presence. Even Lady Amara, who'd seemed unshakable moments ago, watched him with wary calculation. Abandoned. Alaric's laughter was musical and cruel. I gave you the greatest gift imaginable, immortality, power, freedom from death's limitation. That you were too weak to appreciate it immediately is hardly my fault. He stopped before the days, but his golden eyes remained fixed on Evangeline with an intensity that made her skin crawl. And now you've found yourself an Ashford daughter. How deliciously nostalgic. Tell me, Cassius, does she remind you of Isolde? Is that why you're so desperate to bind her, to rewrite history's cruelest chapter? My reasons are my own, Lord Ravenwood said coldly. Are they? Alaric finally looked away from Evangeline, focusing on his progeny with something between affection and contempt. Or are you simply repeating the same mistake that destroyed you the first time? Believing you can love and protect what you're destined to consume. Through the bond, Evangeline felt Lord Ravenwood's anguish spike. She squeezed his hand, sending reassurance across their connection. I'm not Isolde, and you're not the frightened new vampire who ran from love 6 centuries ago. His gratitude flooded back to her, warm despite his cold flesh. Lady Amara rose from her throne, her ancient authority reasserting itself. Alaric of the First Blood, your presence honors this court. But your claim requires clarification. By what right do you stake ownership of Lord Ravenwood's covenant bond? But the oldest right. Alaric spread his hands, candlelight catching on rings that looked ancient enough to predate Rome. The right of creation. Everything a vampire possesses, property, territory, accumulated wealth, belongs ultimately to their maker. I could claim his entire estate if I wished. One mortal girl bonded through a single exchange is trivial by comparison. That law was abolished 3 centuries ago. Lord Shen interjected. The Covenant of Vienna established that vampires reach majority after their first century, becoming independent entities no longer bound to their maker's will. Vienna was politics, not precedent. Alaric's smile was all teeth. And I am older than your precious covenants. I walked the earth when Rome was young. I fed on the blood of pharaohs and emperors. I've created bloodlines that shaped human history. His eyes found Evangeline again. And I've been searching for Ashford descendants since the last one died decades ago. Imagine my delight when whispers reached me that my own wayward progeny had found one. Evangeline felt something shift in the room, a subtle realignment of power as the assembled vampires reassessed the situation. This wasn't just about covenant law anymore. This was about ancient hierarchies and the terrible leverage that makers held over their creations. You cannot take her, Lord Ravenwood said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. The first exchange was completed with her consent. Breaking that bond would kill her. Would it? Alaric moved closer, circling them both now with predatory interest. Or would it simply transfer to me? I am, after all, your maker. Your blood flows with my essence. When she drinks from you during the second exchange, she's already consuming traces of my power. He stopped directly before Evangeline, so close she could feel the absence of warmth from his body. Tell me, little Ashford, when you taste Cassius's blood, do you sense something deeper? Something older and more powerful than his 6 centuries? Evangeline's mind raced. She hadn't drunk from Lord Ravenwood yet. The first exchange involved only him feeding from her. But Alaric's words carried the weight of truth. If Lord Ravenwood's blood contained echoes of his maker's power, would the Covenant ultimately connect her to Alaric instead? The second exchange hasn't occurred. Lady Amara said sharply. Your claim is premature, Alaric. Then let us make it immediate. Alaric's smile widened. I propose a challenge under ancient right. Cassius and I will both offer the second exchange. Miss Thorne will choose whose blood to accept, mine or my progeny's. Whichever she selects completes the bond. Horror flooded through Evangeline, mirrored by Lord Ravenwood's panic across their connection. That's barbaric. The Eastern European vampire protested. The challenge right hasn't been invoked in centuries, because no situation has warranted it. Alaric countered smoothly. But this is unprecedented, an Ashford daughter alive and bonding. Surely that merits invoking our oldest traditions. He looked to Lady Amara. Unless the court fears what true ancient law might reveal about their modern sensibilities. The challenge hung in the air, calculated to trap the court between honoring tradition and protecting their carefully constructed political order. Lady Amara's expression hardened. The challenge right requires consent from all parties. I consent, Alaric said immediately. All eyes turned to Lord Ravenwood. Through the bond, Evangeline felt his internal war, the desperate desire to refuse warring against the knowledge that refusal would invalidate their covenant entirely, leaving her unprotected and vulnerable to any vampire who wanted to claim Ashford blood. And what of Miss Thorne's consent? Lord Shen asked pointedly. Evangeline started. But Alaric interrupted. Ashford tradition dictates that the bonded mortal accepts whatever trials their vampire must face to prove worthiness. She's already consented to the covenant. The specifics of its completion are between maker and progeny. That's not. Evangeline tried again. Ancient law is clear. Lady Amara said, though her tone suggested distaste. If Lord Ravenwood accepts the challenge, Miss Thorne's prior consent to covenant binding includes acceptance of the trial. The trap closed with perfect precision. Refuse, and lose the covenant entirely. Accept and risk losing Evangeline to the monster who'd created his curse in the first place. Lord Ravenwood's hand trembled in hers. Through the bond, she felt his soul tearing, 6 centuries of guilt and fear and self-loathing crystallizing into this single impossible choice. What do I do? His thought was anguished. If I refuse, you're unprotected. If I accept, he might win you. And if he wins you, the thought trailed into darkness too terrible to complete. Evangeline made her decision. I have conditions, she announced, her voice cutting through the rising murmurs. If we're invoking ancient traditions, then let's be thorough about it. Ashford bloodline didn't serve vampires as mindless donors. We were partners, advisors, mediators. Our consent mattered. Our voices carried weight. She pulled her hand from Lord Ravenwood's and stepped forward, addressing the court directly. I'll participate in this challenge, but on my terms. Both vampires will offer blood. I'll taste both. But the choice of whose blood completes the bond remains mine alone, not determined by who forces it down my throat or who has more political leverage. Interesting. Alaric purred. The little Ashford has fangs of her own. I invoke sanctuary of choice. Evangeline continued, remembering fragments from the ancient text she'd read in Lord Ravenwood's library. The oldest covenant law states that Ashford blood given freely creates stronger bonds than blood taken by force or coercion. If you want true power from this bond, you must accept that I choose freely, even if that means neither of you. Shocked silence filled the ballroom. Lady Amara's laugh broke it, genuine and delighted. She knows the old laws better than half this assembly. Very well, Miss Thorne. Sanctuary of choice is granted. The challenge will proceed, but the final selection remains yours. Lord Ravenwood's relief flooded the bond, along with something fiercer, pride, perhaps, or the beginning of something deeper than gratitude. Alaric's expression hadn't changed, but his golden eyes narrowed with new calculation. Clever girl. But be warned, when you taste my blood, you'll understand what 6 centuries of settling for Cassius's limited power has cost you. I can offer immortality beyond his comprehension, knowledge that predates civilization, and protection that makes his estate look like a child's fortress. Perhaps, Evangeline said quietly. Or perhaps I'll taste exactly what kind of monster abandons their creation to burn through transformation alone, caring nothing for their suffering. The ancient vampire's smile finally faltered. The challenge will commence at midnight tomorrow, Lady Amara declared. Both parties will prepare their offerings. Miss Thorne will make her choice before this assembled court. Until then, Lord Ravenwood maintains protective custody of the bonded mortal. The court began to disperse, vampires filing out in groups, their whispered conversations filling the air with sibilant speculation. Alaric remained, his golden eyes fixed on Lord Ravenwood with an expression that might have been fondness or anticipation of violence. It was impossible to tell. Tomorrow night, Cassius, he said softly, we'll finally discover if you're strong enough to keep what you love. I'm betting you'll fail just as you failed Isolde. Then he was gone, dissolving into shadows that fled the candlelight. Lord Ravenwood stood frozen, his face a mask of carefully controlled terror. Through the bond, Evangeline felt the full weight of his dread, not of losing her, but of what she might discover about him when she tasted both their blood and saw, truly, what kind of creature he was compared to the magnificent monster who'd made him. The day before the challenge passed in excruciating slowness. Lord Ravenwood disappeared into the manor's depths at dawn, retreating to whatever sanctuary protected him from sunlight's lethal touch. Through the bond, Evangeline felt him, a constant presence shadowed by anxiety and self-recrimination. He didn't try to contact her mentally, as though afraid his fear would contaminate her decision. She spent the daylight hours in the library, researching everything she could find about vampire bloodlines and the power dynamics between maker and progeny. The texts painted a disturbing picture. A maker's blood was always more potent than their creation's older, richer with accumulated centuries, carrying abilities that younger vampires could only dream of possessing. If she chose Alaric, she would gain connection to something ancient and terrible. power beyond measure, protection that made Lord Ravenwood's estate look insignificant. But she would also be bound to a creature who'd proven his cruelty 6 centuries ago by abandoning a new vampire to suffer alone. Who saw mortals as commodities rather than partners? Who wanted her not for herself, but for the Ashford gift she represented? As sunset approached, Helena found her still reading, surrounded by stacks of crumbling volumes. "You should prepare," the maid said quietly. "The court will convene at midnight." Evangeline closed the book she'd been studying, a treatise on blood bonds written in medieval Latin. "Helena, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When Lord Ravenwood offered you immortality in exchange for service, did you ever regret choosing him as your maker?" Helena was silent for a long moment, her pale face thoughtful. "Every vampire has moments of darkness where they curse their existence. But Lord Ravenwood has never treated me as property. He's never forced me beyond what I consented to give. He remembers I was human once, with dreams and dignity that mattered." Her eyes met Evangeline's. "Alaric would not offer you the same consideration. To him you would be a prized possession, beautiful and rare but ultimately expendable. And yet his blood would make me more powerful. Power without compassion is merely cruelty with resources." Helena began laying out another gown, this one pure white silk that seemed to glow in the candlelight. Its design somewhere between wedding dress and funeral shroud. Lord Ravenwood may lack his maker's raw strength, but he possesses something Alaric lost millennia ago. What? The ability to love more than he hungers. As night fell, Lord Ravenwood finally emerged. Evangeline felt him approaching through the bond before she heard his footsteps, her heart rate accelerating in response to his nearness. He entered her chamber without knocking, looking haggard in ways that transcended physical exhaustion. He dressed formally in black and silver, but his eyes held shadows that spoke of sleepless torment. "Evangeline." Her name was rough on his lips. "I need to tell you something before tonight." She set aside the book she'd been pretending to read. "I'm listening." He moved to the window, staring out at the cemetery where moonlight painted the monument silver. "If you choose Alaric, I'll understand. His blood offers advantages mine cannot match. You would be safer, more powerful, connected to lineage that predates recorded history. Is that what you want?" She asked quietly. "For me to choose him? God, no." The words were torn from him. "The thought of his fangs in your throat, his blood on your lips, his bond replacing mine, it's killing me. The jealousy alone is maddening." He turned to face her, his expression raw. "But I also know what I am. 6 centuries old, yes, but still young by vampire standards. Haunted by guilt over failures I can never undo. Prone to the same mistakes that destroyed my chance with Isolde. You're also," Evangeline said, crossing the room to stand before him, "kind to your servants, patient with my questions, protective without being possessive. You gave me choice when you could have simply taken." His cold hand rose to cup her face. "Those are small virtues compared to Alaric's vast power." "Perhaps." She leaned into his touch. "But I've learned that character matters more than capability. Power without conscience is just monstrosity with better packaging." Hope flickered in his eyes, tentative and fragile. "You've decided then." "I've decided that I'll make my choice based on truth rather than fear. Which means I need to taste both and see what each blood reveals." She covered his hand with hers. "But I need you to trust that whatever I choose, it will be for the right reasons." "I trust you," he said softly. "It's myself I doubt." Midnight approached with the weight of destiny. The ballroom had been transformed into something between courtroom and ritual chamber. The assembled vampires formed a circle around a central dais where 2 crystal goblets stood, one filled with Alaric's blood, gleaming gold, red in the candlelight, the other holding Lord Ravenwood's darker crimson essence. Lady Amara presided over the ceremony with grave formality. "Under ancient covenant law, we gather to witness the completion of blood bond between Ashford daughter and vampire lord. The challenge has been invoked. The choice must be made." Evangeline entered wearing the white gown, feeling like a bride walking toward an altar of blood and shadow. Lord Ravenwood stood to the left of the dais, Alaric to the right. The contrast between them was stark, Lord Ravenwood dark and elegant and visibly anxious, Alaric golden and terrible and supremely confident. She approached the goblets, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain every vampire present could hear it. "The rules are simple." Lady Amara continued. "You will taste both offerings. Whichever blood you choose to swallow completes the second exchange, deepening the bond toward permanent covenant. Choose wisely, Miss Thorne. This decision will shape the remainder of your life." Evangeline reached for Alaric's goblet first, His blood glowed faintly, warm to the touch despite being outside his body. She raised it to her lips and tasted. Power exploded across her tongue, ancient and vast and overwhelming. She saw flashes of his existence. Roman amphitheaters filled with screaming crowds, medieval battlefields running red with blood, Renaissance courts where he'd manipulated kings like chess pieces. Strength beyond comprehension, knowledge accumulated over millennia, and beneath it all, a hunger so profound it had consumed everything resembling humanity. There was no love in this blood, no compassion, no softness, no capacity for genuine connection. Only power and pride and the cold calculation of a predator who'd forgotten what it meant to be anything else. She set the goblet down, gasping. Then she reached for Lord Ravenwood's offering. His blood was cooler, darker, less immediately overwhelming. But when it touched her lips, she saw his truth. The crusader haunted by sins committed in God's name. The young man who'd loved Isolde with desperate devotion. The centuries of isolation and self-imposed exile. The guilt that gnawed at him through endless nights. She felt his fear of becoming monster, his constant battle against instincts that demanded he take and consume and destroy. But she also felt his capacity for gentleness, his protection of Helena and other servants who'd found sanctuary in his household, his careful restraint when every instinct screamed to feed, his willingness to give Evangeline choice even when it meant potentially losing her. This blood held darkness, yes, but it also held the memory of light, the ghost of humanity not yet extinguished. The possibility of redemption through connection rather than isolation. Evangeline made her choice. She swallowed Lord Ravenwood's blood. The second exchange completed with a rush of sensation that brought her to her knees. The bond that had been tentative and partial suddenly solidified, becoming an unbreakable tether between their souls. She felt Lord Ravenwood's shocked joy flooding their connection, felt his relief and gratitude and something deeper, love, perhaps, or the beginning of it, fierce and protective and utterly devoted. Alaric's roar of fury shook the ballroom. "You fool! You chose weakness over strength, sentiment over power. Do you have any idea what you've rejected?" Evangeline rose on trembling legs, meeting the ancient vampire's golden rage without flinching. "I know exactly what I rejected, and I know what I chose, a partner who values my agency over my utility. Someone who sees me as equal rather than possession." She turned to Lord Ravenwood, who stood frozen as though afraid to believe what had just happened. Through the bond, she felt his emotions in crystalline clarity, disbelief giving way to overwhelming gratitude, to fierce determination, to something that felt remarkably like hope reborn. 2 exchanges completed. Lady Amara announced, her voice cutting through the tension. "The bond deepens. One remains to create permanent covenant. Then let it be done now," Evangeline said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "Why wait? We've already chosen each other. Let's finish what we started." Lord Ravenwood crossed to her in 3 strides, pulling her close with desperate reverence. "Are you certain?" "I've never been more certain of anything," she whispered. He kissed her then, the first time their lips had met, and the sensation went beyond physical touch. Through the bond, she felt his soul reaching for hers, felt 6 centuries of loneliness beginning to crack beneath the weight of connection freely given and gratefully received. When they broke apart, his fangs were fully extended. The 3rd exchange, Lady Amara said formally, requires mutual consumption. Blood for blood, life for life, covenant eternal. Lord Ravenwood will drink first, then offer his own vein for completion. Lord Ravenwood's lips found the unmarred side of Evangeline's throat. His fangs pierced through with exquisite precision, and the pleasure that flooded her system made the first exchange seem pale by comparison. She felt him drinking deeply, felt their bond expanding with each swallow, felt her heartbeat synchronizing with the absence of his. Then he pulled back, his wrist rising to his mouth. His fangs opened his own vein, dark blood welling immediately. He offered it to her lips, his eyes holding hers with perfect trust. "Drink," he whispered. "Become mine as I am yours. Forever." Evangeline pressed her mouth to his wrist and swallowed. The transformation began immediately. Fire raced through her veins as his essence, 6 centuries of accumulated power and pain and purpose, merged with her mortal blood. She felt her body changing, cells restructuring, mortality giving way to something beyond human limitation. She would not become vampire, but she would become other, Ashford bonded, extended lifespan, enhanced abilities, forever marked by covenant oath. The bond snapped into final completion with force that shook the ballroom. She felt everything, Lord Ravenwood's thoughts, his memories, his emotions laid bare without filter. 600 years of existence flowing into her consciousness like flood waters. and he felt her equally. Her determination, her courage, her choice to bind herself to darkness because she saw light buried beneath. When awareness finally returned, she found herself cradled in Lord Ravenwood's arms, both of them kneeling on the ballroom floor. The assembled court watched in awed silence. Even Alaric had fallen quiet, his fury transformed into something approaching grudging respect. "The covenant is complete," Lady Amara declared. "Evangeline Thorne and Cassius Ravenwood are bound eternal. Let no vampire challenge what has been freely chosen and witnessed by this court." Lord Ravenwood's face was buried in Evangeline's hair, his body shaking with emotion too large for his immortal frame to contain. "Thank you," he whispered through the bond and against her skin. "Thank you for choosing me, for seeing something worth saving in this darkness." "Always," she sent back. "For however long forever lasts."